Europe. And my name is GINA LAZENBY, and I'm going to be hosting this very interesting and important conversation with our Conscious Cafe founder, Judy Piatkus. Welcome, Judy.
Thanks, Gina. I'm so happy to be interviewed in the interview seat by you.
Well, we're here today to celebrate and offer our congratulations to Judy on this. I'm not sure whether it comes out in the reverse, but it says ahead of her time. So this is Judy's new book, literally out. It's literally hot off the press. So I don't know if anybody's actually had a chance to read it yet, but this is Judy's autobiographical story of her journey for what we on the call. I think most people here have been at a Conscious Cafe, part of the community, so we know Judy from Conscious Cafe from founding that 9 years ago. But Judy is a huge leader in the publishing industry, and this is what the story is about: how a one-woman startup became a global publishing brand. And that was back in the 80s. So my first question to you, Judy, since you started quite young, as you say in your book, what was the catalyst that got you to move from employee? Because, you know, a lot of us particularly in those days, would start out as an employee to shift to being business owner / entrepreneur. What was the catalyst that got that going for you?
Well, first of all, I just want to say hi, everyone. And it's so lovely to see so many people here who I know through Conscious Cafe and from times before that. So thank you. I'm just going to ask, because I think it would be helpful. Gina, would you like to ask everybody to raise their hand if they've actually had a chance to read the book? Because then if they haven't read it, I will answer the questions slightly differently than if most people have had a chance to read it, but it's only been out a week. So, so you might not have had a chance to read it.
Yeah. Do you know how to put your hands up? I'm going to just do gallery view, then I can see, because I'm looking at Judy at the moment. Is anybody ready? No, we haven't got any readers. We're all fresh virgins to the book.
No, I have read it.
Oh, where?
This is Phyllis.
Hello, Phyllis. Phyllis has read it. Okay, we have.
Well, I have about 30 pages to go.
Thanks, Phyllis. Okay. Well, it's just I talk about this in the first few chapters. So I was quite bright at school, and I was the older of 2 daughters, and because I got a scholarship. This was in the days when you could have a scholarship to the local school. So I got this scholarship, and so there was a weight of expectations on me from my family, and it was instilled in me by my parents that I was going to have a career, and nobody knew what this career would be. But because I'd got to this good school, great things were expected. And what actually happened was that I was sort of in the middle of the class and not particularly bright at anything, not very good at English, definitely. My lowest marks were always in English literature. And my parents they were in 2 minds about university. So they wanted me to fulfill my potential, whatever that would be. It wasn't a phrase that was used very much in the 80s. And of course, I was a girl, a woman. And so they didn't really support my university application. And I didn't work hard enough because I liked going out and having a good time. So I didn't get into university. And all my friends went to university, and I went to secretarial college, which is what young women did then. And so the expectations were that I would do something which enabled me to have some money of my own, because my mother had also instilled into me that every woman needed to have money of her own. I was expecting to do something special with my life, but I had no idea what it would be. But when I was 24, I was working in a literary agency, and I was always looking for an opportunity to do work in the agency that was a bit more interesting. And as a result of that, I got to meet some people in publishing companies, and I met a young man, and we decided we would go into business together and set up a company which would sell reprints of out-of-print books to libraries. So that was how my glorious career actually began. I sort of fell into it, but the opportunity came and I did take it.
Mm. So, and you, that was very young to have your own business, wasn't it?
Well, I was, so this was unusual. I was 24. This was in the 1980s. There were very few women in business. There were virtually no role models. And I had been at the literary agency and I'd had jobs in publishing. And in publishing, there were a lot of women. So I was used to women in the workplace, even though I didn't know very many women. There weren't very many women who had interesting jobs. But in the literary agency, two of the directors were women. And I'd worked for a previous literary agency, which had actually fired me because my typing wasn't very good. And that was run by women. So at least in publishing, it wasn't that unusual.
Yeah. And you talk in the book about working from home. I mean, it's interesting where we are in 2021, because I do remember when I was choosing to live in central London, not getting an apartment in a mansion block, but getting a house where the messenger bike could arrive and without too much disturbance, because you talk about the legality. You know, you started everything from home, didn't you? Working from home. So that was another trend, wasn't it?
Well, when I started the first company, I was working in our spare bedroom. I had recently got married. My business partner was working in his bedroom in his parents' home. And this was really unusual then. And we'd meet every now and again. Of course, we spoke on the phone every day, but this was long before computers, long before email. And we did have long phone conversations. And we built this company up for 4.5 years. And then we weren't getting on, and we decided to go in different directions. And I sold my half of the company to him. So by then, we had moved out of our respective bedrooms, and I had a child, and we now had an office in Bond Street. So luckily, the company had done sufficiently well that when he paid me my 50%, I had enough money to think about starting again. So by now, my husband and I and our daughter had moved into a bigger house in Loughton in Essex. And back I was in the bedroom with my typewriter, and I started again, this time on my own. And as you say, Gina, it was unusual, and there were laws affecting what you could do in your home. And I did have to be very careful that we didn't have too many lorries with books and parcels arriving on the same day, so that none of the neighbours would complain.
Interesting, isn't it? Those were the days. And also back then, because you mentioned about being married and you had a child and you had your own business, which obviously moved out of your home into premises. How did you manage all that? Because, you know, back in the day, very often for women, it was a choice. You either really progressed with your business or your career, or you leaned towards your family, but you managed to have 3 children. So how did you juggle and manage all that?
Well, in some ways, I think it was a lot easier for some ways for women in the 1980s. And although there were very few women who were in the workplace in senior positions, you could employ a nanny if you had your own company, and it was acceptable for tax purposes that she could be on the books. So that was brilliant. And there were a lot of other advantages then. So you could put your car through the company, and that was a taxable benefit. So there were quite a lot of savings to be made. So our older daughter, Sonia, she has cerebral palsy. And it gradually became obvious to us as her parents that she wasn't developing very well. And she might always need 24-hour care. And she wasn't able to walk, she wasn't able to speak. She has a strong personality. She could let us know what she wanted, what she felt strongly about, what she hated. But she made a variety of sounds. This wasn't the same as speaking. So I became very aware that I was always going to have to earn a decent sum of money in order that I could afford help with Sonia as she grew older. And so I was motivated because of money and because I was enjoying my work. And a few years later, I did become a single mother. So that was a very strong motivation for me to earn a decent living so that all of us, because we subsequently had a son and a daughter, all of us would be able to have the best quality of life that we were going to be able to have. So that really affected why I did things. So I had a nanny. It made it a lot easier. I always had help. I was always motivated. And in those days, we didn't have email. So it was much easier to create a very clear boundary between home and work. So we gradually put in a loft extension to our house. And I would stop working about 5:30, come down, have tea with the kids. And although I would probably read most evenings, it was very easy to have this boundary, to stop work. You didn't feel the need to be checking on your emails. People didn't expect responses early in the morning, late at night. And I think there was a lot less pressure. Also, for parents at that time, we were more relaxed about our children. They had to fit in with us. Whereas now, for younger parents, the culture is much more about the children being the center of the household, and the parents' needs often coming second to what the children need, or what the parents feel they'd like their children to have. So society had a whole different set of values around the family. And I think this made it much easier for me to grow the business.
So interesting. It's an interesting distinction. The other day when you had a kind of an online celebration with people that you'd work with in publishing, a lot of the feedback I noted from the authors and from people who'd worked with you, they said it was their best time in their career. They loved working at Piatkus. What did you do that created this work atmosphere? You've talked about your own attitude to life balance there, but what was it that you were able to create that was so memorable for people and they're looking back that they love working at Piatkus?
Well, I hadn't ever had a job of any seniority in a corporate organization. So when I started my own company, the longest experience I'd had was working with the partner in my first company. And at the end, because we weren't getting on, I decided that when I had my own company, I wanted to enjoy coming to work every day. And I wanted everybody who worked with us to enjoy coming to work every day. So I didn't have any strong ideas about how to run a company. So therefore, quite early on, we were always flexible in the way that people worked. So my first two colleagues, Jill, who became editorial director, and Philip, who was our sales director, they met me, they came to the house, and then pretty soon afterwards, they began to work from their houses. So this was in the 1980s when it was really unusual. And of course, we would meet occasionally somewhere in town, usually for a meeting. And we were always delighted to see each other because it didn't happen that often. So we were flexible about people's working hours. We accommodated people's families. We understood that people had to go to the dentist, they had to go to funerals. You know, we didn't make a big issue if someone asked for a couple of hours time off for anything. And we actually behaved as if everybody was a person and not a cipher. And And of course, we all understood that we had to make a profit in order to stay in business, but we weren't interested in making a profit at the expense of people's personal lives. And as the company grew, we eventually were able to find premises in town, and we eventually bought our own building. And people were empowered to make decisions. So they weren't always expected to be checking with levels of hierarchy. They were expected to think of themselves as a representative of the company at all times, and to make the best decision that they were capable of whenever they were in a position where it was clear that they should be the ones making the decision. So people enjoyed having that responsibility. So we trusted our employees, and they in turn returned that trust with loyalty. So of course it wasn't always perfect, and of course it was a learning curve, and of course we made many mistakes, but because that was the culture of the company coming from myself and my co-directors, people enjoyed being treated as they hopefully wanted to be treated, and we as directors hoped we were treating them as in a way that we would have liked to be treated if we were still employed by other organizations.
Wonderful, wonderful. You mentioned about not particularly having the literary skills, but you have a nose for authors. Maybe that's your superpower, because you built, you started out modestly, but you built this big global brand. And where I first knew of you, although I didn't meet you until 10, 15 years ago, was when I was starting out in my own career change, and I created a personal development center, and a feng shui school. The teachers in my school were your authors. Karen Kingston was our first, person we did workshops with, and you did her book, Creating Sacred Space with Feng Shui, didn't you? And John Sandifer, I think Robert Holden. So I wish we'd met, actually. I wish I just walked over to your office, but we were doing our own, working in this new field. So this is a field you got into, isn't it? How did you originate with that? You didn't start out with this area of personal growth, human potential. How did you get in there, and how did you find the people you found?
Well, we started off publishing popular fiction, and when I started with my own company, I had learned from the company that I had with the partner, I'd learned about selling commercial fiction to libraries, and we were just publishing hardbacks for libraries, and we would buy the paperback rights from paperback houses. And I go into quite a bit of detail just to explain how that worked in the book. So in the first few months of starting the company, we were really lucky because we were offered some fabulous authors, and especially a lady called Virginia Andrews, who wrote a classic book called Flowers in the Attic. So that helped us get known with the libraries, because people were going into the libraries and wanting Flowers in the Attic and subsequent books. And then I realized that I would never be taken seriously as a publisher if I didn't publish nonfiction as well. But I didn't really know anything about nonfiction, so it was going to be trial and error. And I started with cooking because I liked cooking, not that I was especially good at it, but I liked it at the end of the day because it was such a contrast from being up in the office. And we gradually became known for cooking, and I wanted a baking book because I liked baking cakes. So we had an idea for a book that could be written where all the ingredients would be quickly shoved in a bowl, possibly a food processor. They'd just come on the market, and all I had to do was mix everything up and shove it in the oven. And we approached a well-known author to write this, and she said she would. And the book was called Fast Cakes, and the author was Mary Berry. And that got us started on our non-fiction list. So throughout the 80s, we built on cookery, parenting books. As my own life changed, we began to do a bit of popular psychology. And then we got to the 90s. And by then we were also doing some alternative health. So at the beginning of the 90s was the recession. And that was the first time when people found themselves out of work. And some of them were out of work in a way that they had never previously experienced, because until that time, people often expected to go into a company and possibly work there for the whole of their lives. That was not unusual. But now companies were really struggling and having to let people go. And that was really, really shocking, especially because a lot of these people were white-collar workers, not blue-collar workers, and hadn't had that experience before. So we began to publish books which told people how to develop new skills, either to retain their jobs or to move to different jobs. We began to do business books. And when the recession was over, we saw that people were thinking about the meaning of it all. Why did this happen to me? What was that all about? And we began to publish books in the mind, body and spirit area, because people were becoming so much more interested in it. And so we became pioneers in that area, because my colleagues and myself, we were comfortable with these topics, and many other publishers weren't as comfortable as we were. So Gina, that brings me up to the time when our paths might have crossed, because I certainly knew your name because you were doing all kinds of interesting things in PR, and both of us were contributing to opening people's minds to think about the mystical side of life in a completely different way.
Those were the days back in the 90s. Yeah. So when were you printing Nora by then? Because by chance, I mean, we became friends in about 2010 or 11 through the spiritual connection of the Brahma Kumaris, and when I organized something with Daddy Janki, and then later on Conscious Cafe. But at some point, and I haven't got it here, but I mentioned Nora Roberts. I came across a book, and then I think I saw the Piatkus logo. But anyway, this woman has sold 500 million copies of the book, and they still say that years, you know, it must be more than 500 million now. Sorry, I would have to decline a call. She's written about 250, of which I've read every title. And you brought her out of America, and you took her around the world. I mean, how did you spot her? That's a huge name, isn't it? Well, at least.
Well, Nora Roberts is an extraordinary author. So through the 90s, we developed a paperback company, and we were publishing mass market fiction. We had to have a couple of goes at it because we didn't get it right the first time. And then our Mind, Body and Spirit list really exploded, and other publishers realized that there was this massive interest out there. So by the end of the decade, all the bookshops were full of self-help books, mind, body and spirit books, personal development, personal growth. I mean, it was really interesting to watch it. The larger publishers had come in to the marketplace. They were all setting up their own ranges of books in this area, and it became much harder for a smaller company such as ourselves to compete with the best authors. So we looked at our mass market paperback list, and we wondered what else we could do in fiction. And by about 2001, 2002, Amazon was just getting a foothold in the UK market, and people were beginning to buy online. And we'd always bought a lot of American books. So at Piatkus Books, we used to buy the licenses from American publishers and publish a lot of American books, fiction and non-fiction, in the UK and in export markets such as Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, the Far East. And we realized there were a lot of American authors in fiction, lots of popular best-selling authors who hadn't been published in the UK. And because of Amazon, it didn't matter if the bookshops didn't stock them, because people who were American, for example, and loved particular authors would be happy to order them online. And Nora Roberts was offered to us to publish at that time. So Nora Roberts was absolutely massive in America. And every time she wrote a new book, and she wrote several every year, she's very prolific. Every time she wrote a new book, she could easily be selling 2 million copies of a new paperback when it first came out. But the larger publishers in the UK were finding it difficult to market Nora because they wanted to be developing a lot of British authors, and Nora lived in America, and it was much, much harder to get publicity for her. Because remember, this was the days before the internet. So if an author wanted publicity in another country, they had to go there. It was very, very different when you were promoting a book. So we had published an earlier novel of Nora's for libraries. We knew her work and we took her on, and she became the most successful author on our fiction list. And publishing Nora took us to all kinds of markets, all kinds of places, all kinds of outlets that we wouldn't otherwise have had the chance to get to. And it was really funny, Gina, when I met you and you said, I love Nora, I've read nearly all of her novels, because she has written so many. And that was really a lovely, strong connection between us that neither of us had expected.
You don't normally admit to reading them, but anyway.
Well, no. You know, Gina, that is so interesting, because when I meet an American person and I want them to have an understanding of what we were doing as a publisher, and I say we publish Nora Roberts, and every American will always be amazed and say, wow, Nora Roberts, that's incredible, how marvelous, because she is a household name in America and everybody is proud of her. They've all read a Nora Roberts at some point. But in England, we have a different attitude to literature here. And it's like if I were to say, well, I love romantic fiction, which actually I do. I've always enjoyed romantic fiction. I've always enjoyed popular fiction. But in England, because probably we have such a history going back generations of wonderful writers, and our English writers, such as Shakespeare, are studied all over the world. People don't always like to admit that they love popular authors.
Interesting. So Judy, I don't know how many years it was, but it was the mid-2000s when you sold. What took you to the place where you decided that you'd had enough of this industry, this business that you love? What caused you to call a halt and decide to sell it?
It was interesting because from a fairly young age, I always knew that I didn't want to be a publisher when I was 60. And I had to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is the most popular global book trade fair, and it took place every October. And if you run a publishing company, you've got to be there. I mean, there were a few people who ran companies who said, oh, I never go. But frankly, when all the people you're doing business with are in one place, you have to be there. And I used to hate it. I just really didn't care for it. I don't feel comfortable at trade fairs. It's not quite my thing. And I thought, I don't want to be walking up and down the aisles of the Frankfurt Book Fair when I'm in my 60s. I don't want that. So at some level, I must have known that I was going to make an exit before then, because many people work in publishing until they're in their 70s, because when you're working with words, it's not age sensitive. There's always good work that you can be doing. So that was one thing. And also, I had spent my whole life reading, and I'm not very well read. One of the reasons is because I spent most of my time reading books that didn't get published.
You had to read, didn't you? You didn't have a choice.
Publishers have to read all the time. So you've got to read the books. You've got to read the books that you've commissioned, that someone's written because you've paid them to write them. You've got to read the books that your colleagues want you to read because they want a second opinion. They want to, and we all used to read each other's books quite a lot to see whether we as a company wanted to support this book. It wasn't always one person's decision. Then you get sent loads of books to read because they're on offer to you. And then if you're publishing in a certain niche area, which very often we were, you've got to read the other books in that area to see why they're so successful. And you've got to think about how other publishers made them successful so that you can learn from that. So every weekend I was reading. And if I didn't read one weekend, which of course sometimes I didn't because I was doing more fun things, then the pile of books to read the weekend after was much higher. So I knew at some level that I didn't always want to live with this pressure. And we also, because we published lifestyle books, we were always looking to see what the next trend was going to be. And we could see that the financial bubble was going to burst. It couldn't carry on. And we even commissioned a book on the subject shortly before I sold the company. So I felt the company's doing really well. We actually had a 5-year plan, which I do talk about in the book. The company's doing really well, and I want to quit while I'm ahead. I want to quit while the company is going places so that whoever buys it will know that we're not selling it because we're having a downturn, we're struggling, we're not doing terribly well. I want to sell on my terms when we choose, and that was what happened.
Oh, well done, well done. Well, no doubt you'll have taken some time off afterwards. But one of the things that I've heard you talk about, and I've read it in the book, was about that you didn't take a degree when you were starting out. And you know, in these modern times, kids are pushed to get degrees. And then you took a degree as an adult. So was that just for personal satisfaction because you felt you'd missed out? You know, because was that missing? I don't know that everybody needs to have the degree now, but it's interesting, isn't it? What are your perspectives on that?
In the 1980s, you didn't have to have a degree to get a decent job, but you did need a good education. You did need to be able to express yourself. You did need to work with figures at a very basic level. So it hadn't been essential for me to have this career. And we used to laugh about it at Piatkus because my co-directors also didn't have a degrees. And one of the reasons that we'd all found each other, I think, is because we were sort of we were all a little bit maverick, and we hadn't followed a beaten path. So I hadn't really thought about a degree for years. And what I did want to do was after I sold the company, I didn't do anything for a year. I was just completely burnt out because it had been a very, very stressful thing to sell the company because I couldn't talk about it with my colleagues. My co-directors, by then there were 7 of us in the company, knew, no, they didn't. My 2 co-directors knew what was going on, but no one else did. And I'd always had an open culture, and that was really painful. And then I didn't do anything for a year, which was lovely. I was too exhausted. I was really burnt out. And then I gradually began to see what I was interested in doing, just to play a bit and explore different areas of life. And then one day I was chatting with a friend who I'd made. We were introduced because he was working with a lot of people who wanted to start their own business, and I was doing talks to quite a lot of business networks about how to sell your company. And he told me he was about to do a degree, and I said, "Oh, what are you studying?" And he said, "Oh, I'm studying creative leadership." And I said, "Oh, that sounds interesting. Oh, tell me more." He sent me the details, and I read the prospectus, and I thought, I'm going to do this. This sounds fabulous. So I was interviewed, and they said I could go on the course. And it was interesting because it was a master's degree, and I hadn't done a degree at all. And the reason I was able to go straight to a master's is because I'd spent all this time in the workplace, which gave me as good a grounding as I would have got had I done a first degree. And interestingly, a friend of mine said to me, well, the first degree is about the skills and the second degree is about reflecting on the skills. So I then spent nearly 2 years reflecting about leadership, theoretically, having done it in practice. And I remember on the last day of the final term, And I sat there and I just had this wonderful feeling of completion that I had got the degree that I didn't get in my 20s.
Wow, interesting. Yes, and I suppose were they around you? Were they mainly adults? Is it, or were they? Are they younger? Were you standing out as the oldest, or do you have contemporaries your age in that education environment?
Well, I was the oldest, but that might. I mean, I was certainly the most experienced. And the other people on my course, there were two guys in their 20s, some people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. So it was a cross section, and that was really interesting. And I love the idea that I was doing a university class with people in their 20s, and they were really interesting because one was a guy from Canada, and the course was we weren't going to, the course was a full course, but we actually had an intense week 5 times during 5 terms. So we weren't going into the university every week. So he flew over from Canada, and then the other guy in his 20s, he came from a family in Saudi Arabia. And so we really all had a very, very different background to bring to the topic of leadership.
Please do put questions in the chat if you want to ask questions about being a leader, writing a book, publishing a memoir, or anything that comes up from what Judy said. Judy, what you learned in that creative leadership, when you reflected back on your work experience, did you look back and think, wow, I did that? Yes. Because you also publish business books, and I would imagine, since you've read all the books, that while you're working and publishing, you're learning, aren't you, from all the new information that's coming to you from all the authors. Did you reflect back after that degree and think, yeah, or I wish I'd known that then?
That's quite an interesting question, Gina. It's difficult to remember. I do not spend a lot of time reflecting about what I wish I'd known. I'm more, because there might be all kinds of reasons why anybody doesn't know anything at any one time. So the reason might be because you weren't paying enough attention to something and you should have been, and then you've got to take responsibility for that. But the reason might be because something that would have been really helpful to have known simply never came onto your radar at all, in which case you cannot possibly blame yourself for it. And I would say that I learned that lesson very, very young, because when I had my daughter, Sonia, who is disabled, I had a very difficult time when she was born. And I thought afterwards, supposing if I hadn't chosen to have her in this particular hospital, why did I have her in this particular hospital, which actually was where my husband was working at the time? Why didn't I perhaps think about it more and have her in a different hospital? And so I sort of learned quite early that the decision I'd made to have her in that hospital, and it might not have been the very best hospital that I could have thought of at the time, but it was the hospital locally where everybody was having their children. I couldn't possibly have been expected to have made a different decision. So therefore, later on in my life, I've always looked at the mistakes I've made and how I came to make them, but I haven't given myself too hard a time, because life is all about learning. It's all a learning journey. So when I did the degree, of course, there are always things that all of us could be doing better at any one time. And I think the learning for people in business now is about listening, because business is so complex. But certainly the more we collaborate and get different opinions, the more we can be open to having greater knowledge on whatever topic we have to make a decision about.
Yeah, you're right. Business is so much more complex now, and listening is a great, well, always important, but even more important now. I'm looking at the questions, Judy, and it came to my mind as well about speed reading. did you do speed reading, photo reading at all, or did you literally read?
Well, no, I never did a speed reading course because I actually wanted to have the same experience as the reader who we were selling the book to. Nevertheless, I've realized I do read faster than most people, and I read about 50 pages a half an hour. So I can more or less recognize how long it would take me to get through a book unless it's terribly complex or very dense. But I do read about 50 pages a half an hour. And I can see, because I've got several friends who've told me they've started the book, and of course they might have put it down because it didn't hold their interest. I hope not, but it's definitely a possibility. But I have appreciated, and we've all got busy lives, that it can take most people longer to read my book, or to read any book, in fact.
I think there are elements of your book, though, where it's, I think, of interest. But, you know, it's always interesting to hear the story of someone who's been in business and had a journey and compare it to one's own journey. And, you know, I'm reflecting on this from my age. But if I was younger, I would love to read the story of someone who'd been a leader in business, because it's helpful. So when you study things, I think you take longer than when whizzing through and getting the general gist of things. Let me look for another question. Somebody was asking about memorable authors. Which were the most memorable authors you met in your time of publishing? Met isn't the same as published, but you can read that either way.
Oh, I don't remember who these authors were, but I do remember some authors had sent us some material, and we were curious about the authors, and Jill and I thought we'd meet them to see whether we wanted to work with them, whether they would be able to write a book. And I remember they came and they sat in the office in Windmill Street, and they said, "We've been guided to come to you by a higher power, and we're sure you're going to want to publish us." At which point I think Jill and I privately thought, no, we are probably not going to want to work with you. This is going a bit too far even for us. So we because we were publishing Mind, Body and Spirit authors, we would get offered the most interesting range of books, and some of the ideas seemed very far out in the 1990s, and we did do quite a few books about paranormal. We did do one called How to Defend Yourself Against Alien Abduction. We did do quite a lot of books on UFOs. Those authors were usually fairly memorable. That we didn't meet the author of the alien abduction book, but I do remember that we instantly got an order for 4,000 copies from the Paranormal Book Club, which existed then. We had lots of authors who we loved, lots of authors who were very demanding, lots of authors who are still friends of mine. And I'm just going to mention Anne Jones, because she runs our Conscious Cafe group in New Forest. We loved working with Anne, and her book, Healing Negative Energies, was one of the first books we published in the Mind, Body and Spirit area, and is still in print and went on to be translated into 22 languages.
It must be hard at the outset to know that would, you know, you would end up with doing that in 22 different languages. You never know what's going to really latch on. A question about resilience. Debbie's asking about if you were asked for advice on resilience, what would you advise that person? You obviously throughout your family life and business life called on a lot of resilience skills. So what would you advise? Making yourself resilient. Or more resilient?
That's a question that I'm not sure I've thought about. And it was interesting because I was invited recently, before we all had to go into lockdown. I was invited by some coaches to come to a little workshop they were organizing on the subject of resilience. And I remember this was about 18 months ago. And I sat there and I thought, am I resilient? Because I could think of all kinds of things that could go wrong where I would not be the person that you would want to have next to you, because I am I am really not good with any kind of technology. And I've always thought if I was living in a dystopian time, I would be absolutely useless at growing or cooking or chopping wood or lighting fires or survival skills. And I was wondering if I was resilient. And then when everybody began to discuss it, and I looked back on my early life and bringing up my daughter, and on breaking up with my first business partner, and then subsequently getting divorced, and then being a single mother of 3 children, all of which happened over a period of about 15 years. And I thought I would still have resilience because I could call on the fact that I was resilient then. So I would say to anybody, look back at times when you were resilient, because all of us have had to be resilient. Look back at those times and recognize that you got through and you are still that same person, and call on the knowledge that those times which were so difficult in your life, which you succeeded in surmounting, are part of you now, and they will help you to get through any future times.
Mm-hmm. The more problems that are thrown at you, in a sense, the stronger you get. You just develop the muscles for handling that. Is what you're saying. Somebody's asked if there's a particular standout moment of which you're most proud.
Well,
more than one, but every time I became a mother, that was Standout. The first day that I received the covers of my first books at Piatkus, the day I married Cyril, my husband. Conscious Cafe was pretty good too. I think those have been standout days in a life for which I am very, very grateful. Bless you, Judy. We have another question looking through here about advice. I was going to ask this actually, but somebody's asking about advice you might give your younger self now that you've been through life. You know, if you were looking back, is there something that you would say to yourself, advise yourself? I mean, you're quite grounded in accepting what is, as you've explained, your life philosophy. So how would you speak to a younger person who's starting out on a career and perhaps starting out on their own business?
Try not to take life too seriously, because when you're a teenager and you are in the process of finding out your identity, who are you going to be, it's intense. It's so intense. It's such a challenging period. So to that younger person, I would say, just go with the flow. Believe that you are going to be okay. Choose your friends wisely and ask for help and advice when you need it. But I don't think most teenagers are going to find that easy to follow, that's for sure.
No, we're all different. I wonder if young people in their 20s are different to young people in their 20s. We got them on mute. Okay, I don't know where that interference came from. Yes, I wonder if young people in their 20s are different to, us in our 20s all those years ago. Somebody's asking a question, because you are very much a futurist. I mean, you've talked about, we haven't talked a lot about Conscious Cafe, so we're focusing on you being ahead of your time in in the publishing and the business and the trends that you were developing. What are your thoughts about how life is changing after the year of change that we've all been through, in terms of societal shifts that you might see happening? If you were in publishing now, looking at what, you know, what's going to happen, what should we publish now? I think already somewhere else you've talked about business books produced a number of years ago, business changes, you know, those books aren't as valid. If you were coming up with some kind of editorial plans now, what do you think is going to happen? What would you be looking at?
Lots of topics. And as many of you know, we've had Jessica Adams at Conscious Cafe, and she's certainly giving us lots of clues as to what we can expect to happen in the next few years. So we are going to be very interested in the quality of our food and what we're putting inside ourselves. I mean, health is going to be number one. And what's really interesting about health is that we're going to see massive developments in health, because we're going to see the convergence of technology in so many different areas that we haven't yet seen. So only about 20-25 years ago did we all begin to have computers in our homes. So technology has advanced massively. You've got augmented reality, you've got artificial intelligence, you've got all these different networks, you've got wireless everywhere, you've got different ways of communicating. There have been massive advances in technology over this last 10, 15, 20 years. Now, all these new advances are going to converge in the next decade, and we are going to see so much change in every aspect of our daily lives. And it will be gradual. We won't realize it. It will be small things at different times of the day. I mean, we're beginning to see it with artificial intelligence now. I can't say it's terribly popular, but you know, you buy something as a consumer, and then you've got all these chat boxes, and then you've got machines answering you on the phone. You can't speak to a human. But we're going to see much, much more of artificial intelligence impacting on so many areas of our lives, and we're going to see many advances that will be biomedical. So it is quite possible that by the end of the decade, when we go to visit our doctors, assuming we do visit them and we don't continue to have Zoom calls, they will have a personal map of what our bodies are like, which will be individual to each one of us, because by then we'll know so much more about our bodies and our brains. So all these developments are going to happen over the next 10 years in every area of our lives. So I'd be looking at health. As a publisher, I'd be looking at health. I'd be looking at what's in our food, and food related to health. Of course, it's always related to health, but we need to pay particular attention now, now that we're perhaps not getting so much food from Europe. So we're also going to be looking at growing our own food so that we know what's in it. And we're going to be looking at creating homes that have much more of a garden inside the home. That's one thing Jessica was talking about. And then we're going to look at expanding our homes out into the gardens, because we're going to be spending so much more time outside. Travel's an interesting one. We might not be traveling so much, but what we will have will be much more improved holographics. So we're all of us sort of looking at our computers, but we will in a few years have experiences that enable us to feel that we're all in the same room. I don't think we're doing that yet. So that will be very exciting. So lots of exciting things to happen. And as a publisher, I'd be paying attention to all of them and seeing what people might want to have, what might want to get books about. And of course, escapist fiction will carry on.
Definitely. We all need to escape, if not overseas, then at least into a book. Fall into the story is what Nora's shop is called, isn't it? And that's exactly what we do. I think there's a question about what your formal occupation might be now, Judy.
My formal occupation.
Yeah, how are you using your creative leisure? What's your formal occupation as a question? I can't remember that one.
What's my formal occupation? Oh, I've been saying for 10 years I have a portfolio career. So if I get asked to a reception, you know, I mean, we all would like to think it doesn't actually matter what we do, but we usually do need some kind of answer when people want to start the conversation, as in, you know, what kind of work do you do? So I've been saying I've got a portfolio career for years, and that means anything that I want it to.
And you have your fingers in a number of pies because you're interested in so many different things. And this is how Conscious Cafe is an outlet for you, isn't it? Meeting people, and you know, there's a number of us here who are Conscious Cafe leaders, and it's a wonderful community, both for us as leaders leading our groups and the people who come in community. It's obviously, it started out in your home base, London, and it's far flung now, and it got flung further during the last year of being global on Zoom. What was the question I was going to ask? What's my question? I got lost in Conscious Cafe there.
Well, when it was announced that Piatkus Books had been sold, and that I was not going to continue as I was not going to continue in the publishing world, people said to me, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to do nothing." And nobody could believe that. They said, "How can you do nothing when you've always been so busy?" And I said, "Because I've always been so busy, I don't want to do anything." But what I really love, I said to everybody, is having a conversation with interesting people. And therefore, that is what Conscious Cafe has been all about. And I have had loads of amazing, wonderful conversations, and especially with so many of you who are here today. And that is my greatest pleasure in life. It's forming a connection and a relationship with other people, and sometimes in a small group and sometimes one-on-one. So I feel really, really happy that I've been able to do that at Conscious Cafe.
Lovely. If anybody wants to put in the chat what you might be taking away from our chat today with Judy, that would be lovely for Judy to hear. And maybe some of you here are wanting to do what Judy has done, which is reflect on life and embark on the autobiographical process. This is a great time to ask a question about that while she's here, having accomplished. Yeah, what was it like, Judy, writing this? What was it like, and how long did it take you?
So in 2018, I was invited to a lunch that a friend of mine was organizing, and I didn't know any of the other people who were there. And a woman called Helen Elizabeth Evans, who does scientific hand analysis, impressed me. And so the background I come from, we used to publish books on something we called palmistry, looking at your palm to see what it tells you about yourself and what might be in store in your life. And I had never really had anybody look at my palm. So she didn't look at my palm on that occasion. She looked at the palm of a friend of mine. And I was so impressed because they hadn't met before. I booked a session. So I went to have this session with Helen, and she said, "You've got something to say. All your life, you've facilitated other people having the opportunity to say what they want to say, but you've got something to say, and you need to be writing." So early in 2019, I joined a writing class, and I went to some writing workshops, and I decided that I would see if I could write a book. And that was my project for 2019. And it led to my writing the book, getting a literary agent, finding a publisher, and being published. So it's actually been a 3-year journey to this moment, which has been an amazing journey. And I think most people think at some point about the possibility of writing a book. And many people have got half-written books in their cupboards and drawers. And the wonderful thing now is you can self-publish your book if you don't find a publisher. So I've been fortunate to find a publisher. The last thing I wanted to do was, I would have self-published it because I'd gone to the trouble of writing it. But I'm so glad that I found a publisher, Watkins, who were very happy to take it on. And it's been a pleasure to be the author on the other side of the desk.
Interesting. Have you had any reaction from Piatkus Publishing?
Well, we did
it's
offer
still
it.
Piatkus, Judy.
No, we did. when I sold the company, we all wanted a complete separation. It was best for everybody. And we did offer the book to Piatkus, and they felt it wasn't right for them. And I felt it wasn't the right place either. And they've got a great list, and they're publishing wonderful books. And I think it would have not been a straightforward thing for them to have to do this one. And so I was really happy that Watkins took it on. And Watkins are an independent publishing company as well, of a medium size, doing a lot of mind, body and spirit and personal development. And it's really the perfect place for this book. So everything has worked out for everybody.
Caroline's saying here she loved the fact that you followed your curiosity. That's a wonderful thing to have, isn't it? Curiosity. And Louisa's asking about advice on finding a literary agent if one wanted one.
Well, some literary agents specialize in fiction. Some literary agents specialize in non-fiction. Some do both. There are a lot of literary agents, and they're all looking for the next wonderful author. And they also get offered a lot of material. So have a look in the introduction or the foreword, sometimes not so much the foreword, the acknowledgements of books that you think are similar to what you're writing, because a mention could be made of the author's literary agent, and that person might be interested in your book, and they will understand the market for that book better. So, for example, some literary agents are really good at commercial fiction. They're not so good at literary. Other literary agents are really good at more serious fiction, not so good at popular fiction. And so do some research. There is a wonderful book with all the literary agents in it called The Writer's Handbook, assuming it's still in print, and that tells you all the literary agents. And then go and look at their websites and see what they say. But everybody will say to you, build your platform to start with, and especially with social media, because publishers nowadays have so many channels that they have to reach when they're marketing your book. So the more help and support that they can see that you're going to be able to give them, the more likely they are to look with favor on whatever you're writing.
Interesting. Is there any other questions about books? Any more questions for Judy? Yeah.
There's a question there, Gina, above from someone asking advice for who is writing their first book.
Oh, yes. Yes. Was it your first book, Judy?
My first long book. I've written a couple of tiny gift books.
Yeah. Advice for someone getting that first book done.
There's a lot of advice on the internet, really a lot of advice. If it's fiction, you've got to write it all. With non-fiction, you might be able to write 3 chapters and a synopsis and some sample material. All the literary agents' websites will give you an idea of what you will need to send to the literary agent in order to find a publisher for your book. So you do have to do some research into that, which takes a little while, but then you realize that you're starting to get more understanding of how publishing works.
Pat's asked here about any comments or insights in relation to moving from doing to being.
Oh, thank you, Pat. Recognizing that I think it comes from mindfulness, and I think many people who are here today and who come to Conscious Cafe have an understanding of the basics of mindfulness. Mindfulness makes you aware at a basic level of what is going on in your mind. So once you've done your first mindfulness course, or you've been to a mindfulness workshop, you go on and you get in the habit, if you're interested in practicing mindfulness, you get in the habit of being mindful. And I would say, because I read and Piatkus published Jon Kabat-Zinn in 1996, 1997. I've probably been practicing mindfulness since then, and that makes me very much aware. I've still got a long way to go, but more aware than many people perhaps of what's going on in my head. Why am I doing this? Why am I not doing that? We all have blind spots, but the experience of living consciously and living mindfully means that if I find myself doing too much, I'll recognize it, or I'll particularly be aware when I'm getting tired, and I'm trying to live in the flow. So this morning I woke up tired because I'd done 4 separate things and quite a lot of publicity for the book. So I'd said to my husband, well, I'm going to have a lie-in this morning. Don't wake me up. I want to get up when I wake up. And then I thought, right, I've got 3 hours, and I could either sit quietly, because that's what I need to do, like nothing, or I could go for a walk, which is what I ended up doing. But I'm thinking of everything, not in terms of what I should be doing, but in terms of what do I need? What is my body? What do I need that's the best thing for me at this moment? And probably by 5 o'clock this afternoon, I'll be on the computer answering my emails because I'll be refreshed. But it takes a bit of practice to be able to live like that.
Mm. Judy, I've always valued all the little tips I get from you, whether they're intentional or unintentional, of, you know, how you manage life, how you manage business. And I value that in my conversations with you that we have and around Conscious Cafe about, I just find them very helpful in all the conversations that we've had. So somewhere along the line, you've, I think, been exposed to so many different ideas and ways of being, and you've had the mindset to take them on board, because there's a lot of people who can go through life, publish things or being exposed to them and not take them on board. I think, would we agree on that? You can, not everybody, you know, takes things on, or behind the facade, as it were. It's not what it seems on the outside, and it seems all the way through. Everything that you've been exposed to and that you've learned, you've practiced, and so you've ended up having a company that's nurtured you and a whole load of people who've worked there, and all the people who've read all the books of the authors that you brought to the world. So yeah, well done. That's an amazing combination of skills that you've brought to business and publishing and your own life and family.
Oh, thank you, Gina. But I have to say, you know, we all come into this lifetime with gifts. I've been really lucky that I've been able to enjoy and benefit from the gifts that I came in with. We're all I do believe we will be having, I believe in reincarnation. So I think all of us need to recognize that we came into this lifetime to have whatever experience it is that we're having, and to make the most of it. I wish you all the joy of making the most of this lifetime.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you, we're coming towards the end, but Debbie's put an interesting question in here, which I want to ask about insights about modern leadership and strengths and needs for development. You know, as we've reflected before, there's so much is changing, and you've been a leader, you've actually studied leadership, not just leadership, creative leadership. So yeah, insights about how leadership, you know, modern leadership, how it's changing. What does it need?
Well, I think it's really fascinating because we've had the pandemic. Every company has had the opportunity to reflect on its culture and on its leadership. And I heard yesterday about how some companies in the city are wanting all their employees to return to the workplace and carry on as if nothing had happened. And of course, the employees have got used to the benefits of working from home. And while they're happy to return to the workplace, it doesn't mean they're going to want to be in the workplace every day. And at the end of the day, if a company wants the best talent, and every company wants the best talent, because if you don't keep and retain the best talent, if you don't have the best people, you're not going to be able to achieve all the things you want to achieve. So you have got to be a company where people want to work. Now that we have openness and transparency in websites, where people can write about the companies where they're working and what's good about them and what's bad about them, a company really needs to be a place that needs to attract the best people. And the best companies will now be thinking, how are we going to retain the best people now that they've had a chance to work at home? And of course, what they need to be doing is consulting with the employees and looking for what is going to be the best for everyone. And the best companies will do that. And those companies where the leadership is not so good will struggle to retain the people who are most important to them.
Absolutely, there's so much has changed, and Conscious Cafe is a good opportunity and forum for us to have all these conversations about what's changing for us. And we're all in a process of continual change. How are we adapting? And it's good to have those conversations together, as you've said, and a number of other people have said in the comments, about the key is collaboration, about us forming the answers together. We don't individually say, oh, I've got the answer. It's constant change is calling for a synthesis of different points of view and different approaches. And I think we're all, blessed to be living at this time when we can be in that conversation, and Conscious Cafe is a lovely forum for that. If there's any final thoughts from anybody, you're welcome to put that, but we're at 14:14 according to my clock, and that's pretty good timing. A minute to round up. People can go on, and if you can unmute yourself if you like, and just say a final bye. Thank you, Judy. Thank you,
Gina. Can I? Do you want to stop the recording? And
I can indeed stop the recording. Ending the recording.